You might have come across QAnon, the Trump-centric conspiracy theory that's exploded during the pandemic. But paranoia has been around in US politics for decades, and QAnon is the latest iteration.
QAnon is a conspiracy theory that originated in 2017 with posts online internet posts from a character called Q. And they believe that this person is sketching out sort of a secret world from the Trump administration. It's that the world is controlled by a cabal of nefarious Democrats and bankers and Hollywood figures, and that these people sexually abuse and even drink children's blood, and that Trump has a big plan to arrest and execute all these people.
If you want to go down the QAnon rabbit hole, and there's more, so much more, you should definitely read Will Sommer's reporting on the movement. Seriously, he's been covering this for years. He's gone to their rallies, spoken to people on the inside.
Certainly there have been some people who's, are like, Will, you've got to betray, you have to turn on the cabal before it's too late. They think they have my best interests at heart.
But we're going to look at why people, including a likely future congresswoman, even believe this stuff, and how it might affect you as this movement begins to make inroads into the Republican Party. The idea that there's a deep state covering up for a world-ruling cabal of child eaters points to, at the very least, a lack of trust in the US government. But it wasn't always like this. Back in 1964, 78% of Americans said they trusted their government to do the right thing always or most of the time. Just 16 years later, that number dropped to 26%. What happened? The Vietnam War happened. When that first survey was taken, Lyndon B. Johnson had just become president after JFK's assassination. Johnson decided to escalate American troop presence in Vietnam without really explaining to the public what they were doing there. Eventually, tens of thousands of Americans were drafted to fight this war. Nearly 60,000 were killed, along with 1 million Vietnamese. While Johnson insisted things were going well, the public's confidence was shaken when the New York Times published the Pentagon Papers, leaked documents that showed the government knew the war was unwinnable. Trust in the political establishment fell again when the Watergate scandal exposed the next president's abuses of power. Then, the public's faith was tested by an economic recession and a series of geopolitical crises. Okay, but how did we get from there to here? First, let's be clear. We're not saying that anyone who doesn't trust the US government believes in wild conspiracy theories. What we're saying is that when there's a credibility gap, people start looking for answers in the wrong places. It's easy, for example, for people to look up at the elite, at political and financial corruption, at the way those at the top hold on to their privilege and power, and conclude they're all working together to keep society down. But all that is evidence of systemic problems throughout society's institutions, not proof of a group of puppet masters controlling the world. Where QAnon sharply deviates from most of these other conspiracies is that the people who believe in it actually put their faith in someone powerful, someone rich, someone who was born into the elite.
I think Trump's position as sort of the conspiracy theorist in chief is massive here because, this is a guy who started his political career with birtherism and who's constantly just throwing these things out.
I was the one that got him to produce the birth certificate, and I think I did a good job.
I think that really gives these conspiracy theories a lot more public space than they normally would have.
Trump's refusal to denounce a movement that centers around him has QAnon supporters feeling vindicated.
Yeah, so QAnon people have been obsessed with getting acknowledgement from Trump, and this is because their ideas are so crazy that, they need that validation.
Is this belief that you are secretly saving the world from this satanic cult of pedophiles and cannibals. Does that sound like something you are behind?
Well, I haven't heard that, but is that supposed to be a bad thing or a good thing? I mean, if I can help save the world from problems, I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to put myself out there.
But I think, that both validated QAnon people, certainly the ones I talked to, but it also, I think, is a new recruiting tool for them because they'll say, well, if you like Trump, Trump says these people are great.
At least 2 killings have been linked to QAnon supporters, and the FBI has called the movement a potential domestic terrorism threat. But it could get worse.
I think if Biden wins, we're looking at a lot of QAnon people who are suddenly going to be like, what's next? because they were promised the storm where, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and Tom Hanks and all these people were going to be arrested. And when that doesn't happen, some of them will probably say, oh, QAnon was fake. But I think some will say, we have to step up ourselves. They say, like, we are Q, stuff like that, and, kind of take action in the real world.
Another part of QAnon's appeal is that it links together pre-existing theories.
I mean, there's anti-vaccine stuff, there's stuff that kind of could fit in on an episode of Hannity, there's like Pizzagate stuff.
The movement can be broad because it's based on cryptic clues that followers try to decipher. It's like a real-world interactive video game.
The QAnon clues, they offer kind of a gamification of it that other stuff doesn't have. And so you get these clues and then people say, oh, I've got to research these clues. And so they almost sort of self-radicalize because they fall down these holes. And you can interpret them different ways.
It's easy perhaps to roll your eyes or mock people who think this stuff, but sometimes what drives them there can be really heartbreaking.
I saw a guy at a rally say, well, I have cancer and I don't have health insurance, but that's okay because Trump's going to get the cabal and they're going to reveal the cure for cancer.
Will says the Jeffrey Epstein case has led many people to Q.
I think Epstein has been a huge gateway into QAnon because, that is a real life cabal. It's not that it's running the world, but a powerful people abusing children. QAnon people say, like, see, this is what QAnon was talking about.
But when you point out that Trump had been friends with Epstein for decades, or that Trump appointed the prosecutor who gave Epstein such a lenient deal in the first place to his cabinet,
they say, well, that's because Trump was he was infiltrating this crew to bring them down.
So why should we care that some fringe online group is convinced of this bizarre theory? Well, QAnon was mostly on the fringe until COVID-19. It's probably been the biggest gateway yet for QAnon converts. Although QAnon first spread on obscure, hard-to-use message boards like 8chan, it was on mainstream social media platforms that it found its biggest audience. Between March and July 2020, QAnon content increased by 71% on Twitter and a whopping 651% on Facebook. In October 2020, Facebook announced it would ban all QAnon content on its platforms.
The pandemic has been huge for QAnon because then they say, well, the cabal, it's the creation of the cabal or something like that.
In a paper for MIT, Professor Ethan Zuckerman, who researches how media is used for social change, wrote that we're now in an era of the unreal, where people can't even agree on what reality is. QAnon believers talk about exposing others to their reality. They call this evangelism red pilling.
You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
This unreal approach is shaping US politics, and not just at the presidential level. 24 candidates on the ballot in November 2020 have expressed support for QAnon. Most are expected to lose, but in Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene is running for Congress unopposed.
Q is a patriot. We know that for sure, but we do not know who Q is.
Trump has called her a future Republican star, and where Trump goes, so does the Republican Party. Ted Cruz and Donald Trump Jr. have both promoted a fake story about California lawmakers legalizing pedophilia. Now, the bill they're talking about is actually meant to address disparities between straight and LGBTQ sex crime convictions, but the fake story resonates with QAnon believers who've sent death threats to the author of the bill. And in a September 2020 poll, 41% of Republicans who'd heard of QAnon said it's a good thing. Congress is where laws and bills that shape the lives of Americans, and frequently non-Americans too, are made. Now that power could be in the hands of people who believe in an entirely different reality. So while QAnon pins its hopes on Trump, it won't necessarily die out once his time in office is over. It's led to many people becoming alienated from their families and loved ones, but it also provides an easy, if unreal, solution for people struggling with real problems.
It's that guy who did it. Like, if we would just get him, if we just arrest Hillary Clinton, all the problems in the world would be solved. Versus, much harder and things that are much more difficult to grapple with.
Grappling with these difficult issues will be even harder if the Republican Party continues to enable a movement that's destroying Americans' faith in their country's political process and in reality itself.